Hi everyone, welcome back. I hope you're happy and well. Today I want to do another sewing video. This video I want to show you the detailed step-by-step of how to make your own maxi skirt. You can make this skirt yourself with just one piece of fabric and rectangles. So here we go. So to explain what we're doing, I made a diagram. The front of the skirt is made out of one rectangle of fabric. The back of the skirt is also made out of one rectangle of fabric. But we'll cut that rectangle in half long ways, making two skinnier rectangles. The waistband is also a long rectangle. You'll need an 18-inch zip and also some extra fabric if you want to add pockets, and I'll show you how to do that too. So in order to find the amount of fabric we needed, we measured from my waist to the floor, which was 110 centimeters. We then added 5 centimeters to that to make a wide hem. This was necessary because of it being heavier fabric and so that it would sit better, but you might not need that much for a hem. Anyway, that ended up being 115 centimeters. We then doubled it so that it was for the front and the back, and that ended being 230 centimeters. We added 20 centimeters for the waistband, which is a generous amount, and 10 centimeters so that we could make the check of the fabric match itself. You might not need to do this, but it's always good to have more fabric than not enough. First, you need to fold the fabric in half long ways with pretty sides on the inside. You then need to make sure that there is a straight edge. Our easy way to fix that was by cutting along the top check line, but only on one layer of the fabric. Flip back the top layer of fabric and straighten the edge of the fabric underneath. Next is to cut the waistband. Even though I allowed 20 centimeters for the waistband, I cut 16 centimeters for the waistband. This allowed for a 2 centimeter seam allowance and means that the waistband will end up being about 5 centimeters wide. I like a wide waistband so that I can put a belt on it. The rest of the fabric will make up the skirt. Match the remaining edges of fabric, still folded long ways. Cut along the line of the fold. If your fabric suits being ironed, you might find it easy to iron the fold and then open the fabric out and cut along the line of the crease. But for this fabric, the white line of the check happened to be where the fold was, so I cut along that. This leaves the two skirt panels. One panel needs to be cut in half to put the zip in. The easiest way to do this is to fold the top layer of fabric in half and then cut the bottom layer right next to the fold of the top layer. Next is to cut out the pockets. This is optional, but why would you have a garment that didn't have pockets? Draw this shape on tracing paper or baking paper. This line is for the seam allowance. Then along about 8 centimeters, which will get sewn into the waistband. Then use your hand to measure the opening of the pocket. This should be about 5 centimeters down from the top of the pocket. Then put your arm in and draw a loop around it. This may look big, but it means that you'll have plenty of room for both your hand and your phone and whatever else you might want to put in your pocket. Use that pattern to cut out 4 identical pockets on a spare piece of fabric. Place one pocket piece in one corner of each of the back pieces on the pretty side of the fabric. They should fit in the right angle corners very neatly. Then pin the straight side of the pocket to the skirt fabric. You don't need to pin the curved part of the pocket. Put the other 2 pockets in the top corners of the front of the skirt on the pretty side and pin them same as before. This may seem a little out of order, but next you need to sew up the back of the skirt. It will make sense later and it just makes everything easier. Just trust the process. So you need to pin the back skirt panels together. Next, use the zip that you're going to use to measure the space that it will go in. Place the zip so that the tag part of the zip stops just under your seam allowance and the extra fabric of the zip is above the seam allowance. Mark the metal bottom of the zip with a pin or a fabric marker if your fabric is light enough in color. Sew from the bottom of the skirt, which is at the other end from where the zip will go, towards the top. Use normal length stitches and a 1.5 centimeter seam allowance. Once you get to where you've marked the bottom of the zip, stop and fix your stitches, which means to sew forward and backward for 2 stitches each. Then lengthen the stitch length to as much as your sewing machine will allow and sew the rest of the length of the zip, and then 1 stitch back from the end. To insert the zip, first iron the zip part that you've just sewn open and flat. Place the zip on there face down, tag down. Make the metal thing at the bottom of the zip be on top of where you fixed the stitches before making them long. The top of the zip should line up with where you measured to before. The teeth of the zip should line up and sit in the seam where the long stitches are. Pin along the edge of the zip. It's important to keep it all flat and not pinned to each other. Use a doubled over, very differently coloured thread and a needle to hand stitch the zip in place. This is just to replace the pins, and the stitches don't need to be small and neat, they just need to be secure. Change your machine to use a zipper foot if you have one, and if you don't, just be super careful. On the pretty side of the fabric, sew next to the hand sewn stitches. Again, be super careful because if you hit the teeth of the zip with your needle, you'll probably break it. After that, take out the hand stitches and carefully unpick the long stitches of the zip. Next, we'll be revisiting the pockets. Sew the long straight side to the fabric with a 1 cm seam allowance. Zigzag stitch or overlock that edge. Do this for both the front and the back skirt panels, which is the 4 pockets in total. Sew the front to the back at the side seams, pretty sides together with a 1.5 cm seam allowance. At the top of the pocket, sew down for about 5 cm. This will bring the opening of the pocket down to a more accessible place. Also 5 cm from the bottom too. You can then zigzag or overlock all of the edges. For the waistband, measure your waist, then add 10 cm and cut the waistband fabric to that length. Add interfacing to the whole waistband on the not pretty side with the shiny side of the interfacing facing down. Remember to use baking paper to protect your iron and the ironing board if you're using iron-on interfacing. Measure the waistband into 4 equal quarters with the longer extension of the waistband on the right hand side, not pretty side, facing up. Then divide and pin the skirt equally, starting at the front. To find the center front, match the side seams together and place a pin on the fold it creates. Then match a side seam to the front to find the quarter, mark and pin, and so on. Flip the waistband over so that the pretty side is facing up. Also turn the skirt to be right or pretty side out, so that you can pin pretty side of the skirt to the pretty side of the waistband. Next is to make box pleats. To make this clearer, I'm using a plain fabric for demonstration purposes. To make a pleat, take the looser fabric of the skirt and pull it so that it is straight against the waistband and even on both sides of the gap. The fabric should be taut against the pins that are holding the skirt to the waistband and be equal. Then fold inwards to make a pleat. Tuck it in close to the pin and fold the pleat to the center. Repeat with the other pin and fold that to the center. The folds will overlap and then you can pin it in place. After you've completed all of the pleats, use a needle and thread to sew the pleats down. This is basically the same purpose as for the zip, to hold everything in place and save you from sewing over the pins. You also need to pin the pockets down so that they're facing the center front, and then you can sew it all again with the sewing machine with a 1.5 cm seam allowance. Sew down the pockets as well. And keep in mind that you can and should readjust anything you think should be readjusted while you're sewing everything to keep it as straight as possible. So sew for a little bit, readjust, sew a little bit more. It won't be a problem and it's better to go slower than faster. And if your fabric is heavy like mine, I suggest sewing it again inside of the seam allowance for extra stability. For the waistband, take the top edge, the part that isn't sewn to the skirt, and fold it down about 1.5 cm and iron it towards the inside. Fold the waistband pretty sides inside, matching the folded edges and ends, and pin it in place. Stitch the end, making sure to include the edge of the interfacing. Do this on both ends of the waistband. Then trim the ends, snip the corners, and fold it the right way out. Match the folded over edge of the waistband to the stitching line of the skirt, and then pin in place all along the waistband. To sew this down, I chose to hand stitch it on the inside, but you can also sew it with the machine on the outside if you don't mind stitching showing. It'll kind of depend on what sort of fabric your skirt is made of, and it might not matter. I'm using a brightly coloured thread to demonstrate here how to hand sew it, but it would be better to use a thread which matches your skirt. For the extended part of the waistband, a simple whip stitch is all that's needed. When stitching the waistband, pick up a little bit of the skirt stitching and then a little bit of the bottom of the waistband to make a stitch. Continue this for the entire waistband and it should end up not showing through on the front. Next is to sew on the skirt, hook and bars. My fabric is heavy so I sewed on 2. Unzip the zip and the hook part goes on the part of the waistband which is in line with the zip. Sew the hooks next to each other as parallel as possible. This is a neat little trick to sew the bar part on. Line the waistband up so that it's straight and perfect against everything. Use a pin to go under one of the hooks and pin it to the fabric so that the hook is hooked on just like it would be if it was hooked onto the bar. Unhook the hook and line up the bar next to the pin. Sew both ends of the bar onto the waistband and then remove the pin. The final step is to hem the skirt. Probably need help to do this. Put on the skirt and the shoes you intend to wear with it. Then stand on a stool and have someone pin the hem. It may take a few goes to get it even and straight. I ended up with quite a wide hem at the bottom, which was good because of my skirt being a heavy fabric, and the extra weight will make it flow nicely. You could sew the hem pretty much however you prefer, but this is how I did mine. First, I folded the top of the hem in. That's the very end of the fabric. I folded it in, pinned it, and sewed it in place. And once that was sewn, pinned it to the rest of the skirt as straight as possible and sewed it in place. And then it was finished. So that's it. I hope you found this at all useful. I hope it was easy enough to follow. I tried to be as clear as possible. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye!